All successful people are excellent communicators. So how do you communicate more effectively with others? Now, the first one is a profound communication principle, and the first agreement: say what you mean and mean what you say. Words have the power to create or destroy, and a careless comment can alter a relationship forever. So it's a good idea to choose your words carefully and consider their impact before you put them out there in the world. Before you speak or write, I want you to ask yourself these 4 questions. Is it necessary? Is it true? Is it kind? Is it helpful? And if you don't get yeses to those questions, then don't say it. One of the things I observe is simply this: a lot of people are very careless with their language. I mean, the words you use either lift up your energy, the words you use either make you more creative, or the words you use deny your talents. Think about the great dictators. Their words of hatred, their words of toxicity, their words of breakdown cause the people around them to do sometimes incredibly terrifying acts. And then you look at people like Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King Jr., Mother Teresa, the great business builders, the humanitarians, the great artists. They were so careful with their words, and their words lifted people up. That's really what great leaders do. They use the language of leadership. I see this everywhere. Someone very close to me, who was a little sloppy with her languaging, said, "Oh, I forgot to do this. It's not on my to-do list." I should punch myself in the face. If you say that every day, what's that doing to your self-esteem? If you say that over a lifetime, what's that doing to your self-identity? As you know, your income is a function of your self-identity, and your performance is a reflection of your personal story. The way you build your self-architecture and the way you see yourself in the world is in part through your words. You're never going to rise any higher in terms of your impact in the world than the way you see yourself. If you see yourself as average, well, you're not going to read the books, go to the events, do the study, put in the training time, find the mentors, do the work to rise to world class, because you're running an interior psychological story that says you're average, and the A players are somehow different from you. If deep down inside, you're coming from scarcity, and you think, "I'll never have more than the salary that I'm making," it's because of the story that you have through the words you've used. Well then, you're not going to go out there and ask for the big order. You're not going to start the big business. You're not going to read the books on financial mastery. Because deep inside, you would say, what would be the point? I'm not one of those people. If you want to rewire yourself, your identity, so you go in the world, and you're literally operating at legendary, then you absolutely must dial into this first point of what legendary leaders do in terms of the way they speak, which is to get your precision of languaging right. Like I say, the great leaders, how did they transform humanity? It was through their words. How did the great military generals get their armies to go out there on fire? It was through their words. So calibrate your languaging, sir. Your words to yourself are world class, and also the words you use to your team, to your customers, to your loved ones. So incredibly important. This leads me to the next communication skill that's probably the most critical skill for everyone on the planet to master, and that is the skill of effective listening. Now, the undeniable truth is that so many of us are terrible listeners, and there can never be effective communication without both parties being as focused on the listening part as they are in the speaking part. Because if you aren't really listening and responding to what the other person is actually saying, ultimately, all you're really doing is having a conversation with yourself. Now, here's an invaluable tip. Whenever you're having an important conversation, it could be with your spouse or your partner, with a child, with an employer, a customer, or someone on the other side of the political divide, let them go first. Don't interrupt them and argue with them. Let them empty themselves out first. Remember this, you can't pour water into a full glass. You have to let the water out before you can have more put in. Instead, really listen to their point of view, be curious. How is it that they've come to feel this way, to have this point of view? What is it that they are needing you to hear? Now, this takes a commitment to really want to know what the other person is experiencing and needing. Sometimes when you've done your best to listen closely to someone, you may not have heard exactly what it was they were trying to say. That's why it's so important for you to double check and make sure you really understood them correctly. The easiest way to do that is before you speak, to say, "So what I'm hearing you say is," and then repeat back to them what you think they were saying and what they meant to say, and then give them the opportunity to clarify any misunderstandings that you might have before you respond to them. So it's always best to make sure you're really responding to what they're really saying. The more you practice again, the quality of your performance is all about the quality of your practice. And the more you actually practice speaking up when you know you want to speak up, the more you will actually step up when you actually speak up with someone. And you tell them how you're feeling and you tell them what's most important to you. Well, if it's the right relationship, one that's meant to be in your life, whether it's professional or personal, that is really a gateway into the other person. If you're going to make your point and they're going to make their point, you better have your points organized, because otherwise you're going to look like and be an absolute idiot. You are not going to get anywhere. Teach people to be articulate, because that's the most dangerous thing you can possibly be. If you're going to speak effectively, you have to know way more than you're talking about. To do that, you have to do a lot of reading. That's on the input side. And then on the output side, well, there's some tricks. There isn't 1,000 people there. There's 1,000 individuals. So you just look at an individual, and you say something, and you can tell if they're engaged, they look confused, or they look interested, or they look angry, or they look bored, and they give you feedback about how you're doing. The people that I've watched in my life who have been spectacularly successful, they have skills clearly, that's a minimum precondition. But they're also very, very good at articulating themselves. So whenever they negotiate, they're successful. They are quiet, self-contained, not particularly expressive, they're sensitive, people-oriented, and concerned about other people's opinions. If you're communicating with this person, it requires slow, low-key, easygoing, friendly, almost warm and fuzzy. Now, the third type of person is what we call the director. They want to achieve with and through other people. They like to talk about achievement. What are you doing? How did you do it? How did it work? Let me tell you what I did and how it worked for me. Many times they become managers or executives because they have highly integrated personalities. They're very concerned about results, but they're also concerned about people. Now, everybody you meet is in one of these 4 quadrants or groups. The mistake that most people make is that they treat everyone else as if they were just the same as they were. However, no matter which style of communicator you are, 3/4 of the people you meet are something else. Now there's no right or wrong, better or worse style, these are almost born into people. You can see them in children from an early age. However, your job in asking questions and listening to people is to find out which style they are, and then to practice personality flexibility so that you can get along with a greater number of different types of people. Somebody's having a bad day, and you don't know they're having a bad day, but somebody's really feeling bad, and you offer up a kind word. Maybe it's just a friendly hello, how are you? Maybe it's just taking a minute or two to listen to what somebody has to say. But your few words of kindness or your few minutes of attention could turn somebody's day around, might make them feel more worthwhile, cared for. Be generous with your kindness, it'll go a long way. When you give kindness, it's not gone, it's invested. It'll come back to you 2, 5, 10, 100 times. Kindness is so important in every aspect of your life. It's so important in building good relationships with others. Most people won't reveal the problem on the first question. You say, Mary, how are you today? How are things? And she says, well, everything's okay, and you can tell by the way she said it that everything's not okay. And most of us don't want to come right out and say what the real problem is unless 2 criteria are met. Number 1, we're talking to someone we can trust, and number 2, we're talking to someone who really cares. So sometimes it takes that second question, maybe a third and maybe a fourth before trust fills, and the person finally understands that you do care. Then they're willing to tell you what's really going on, what's really on their mind. Learn to ask questions that will build the trust and communication between you and those you work with. Learn to express, not impress. If you want to touch somebody, express sincerity from the heart. Impress builds a gulf, express builds a bridge. When you want to enhance the rapport you have with someone, you need effective communication skills. You'll need the skills that'll help you work better with others to achieve their goals and achieve your goals. You need effective communication skills. Let me give you a few tips on good communication, because to be able to get along well with others, to be able to work well with others, to be able to live well with others, you must be a good communicator. 1. Have something worth saying, interest, fascination, sensitivity, and knowledge. 2. Now that you've got something worth saying, number 2 is say it well, and you've got to be able to translate it so it'll benefit someone. You must have a good delivery system for your substance and knowledge, awareness, understanding, and experience. Learn to say it well. Here are some clues on saying it well. 1. Sincerity. The best communication occurs when both people are sincere, one sincerely wishing to learn or listen, and the other sincerely wishing to share. 2. Repetition. Part of saying it well is simply practicing to say it well. Practice, practice, practice. Part of what I teach in sales training is practice. Practice. You start with something simple, and when you don't know much about what you're doing, practice is even more important. So, practice your presentation and your ability to communicate what you know. The people out there who say, no, I wouldn't care for any, are just as valuable. Why? Because they took the time to let you practice your presentation. Especially when you're just getting started, you might want to pay them to listen to you practice while you stumble around. Be thankful for the no's. Practice helps you develop skills. Skills make labor more valuable. If you just sell, you can make a living. If you skillfully sell, you can make a fortune. If you just talk, you can hold a family together. If you skillfully talk, you can build dreams for the future. The difference is skill. You can cut a tree down with a hammer, but it takes about 30 days. If you trade the hammer for an axe, you can cut the tree down in about 30 minutes. The difference between 30 minutes and 30 days is the tool, and your best communication tool is your skill. So practice to get the skill of saying it well. Part of saying it well is sincerity. Here's another part of saying it well: brevity. Sometimes you don't need too much, just enough. The more you know, here's what I found out: the more you know, the briefer you can be, because you can learn to make words more effective. Next is style. Part of saying it well is style. Be a student of style, a variety of styles. Then, make sure you develop your own. Be a student but develop your own. Don't be someone else, let someone else influence you but don't become them. Develop your own style. Here's another tip on saying it well: vocabulary. You've just got to have a good vocabulary to say it well. Vocabulary, we can only translate for other people with the tools called vocabulary. If you're lacking in vocabulary, then you're lacking in tools to describe some problem or some answer. Words, vocabulary, you can't communicate without them. And you can't communicate well without a defined vocabulary. Every time you come across a word that's new to you, what should you do? Look it up. Every time you're in a conversation and the other person uses a word that's new to you, look it up. Now, most of the time you can figure out the meaning of a new word by how it's used, but if you can't, make sure you hold your response until you know for sure. Vocabulary is a way of seeing. It gives us insight, and only with your present vocabulary can you see. You can't use tools you don't have to see to create light, understanding, awareness, comprehension, perception, vision. You can only have as much vision as your present vocabulary will give you, and if you're limited in vocabulary, then you can't see very well. What if a person could only see the world through a little tiny hole? Now, vocabulary is also what we use as a tool to express what's going on in our heart, what's going on in our head, to translate our questions, translate our answers, our perceptions, what we see, to be able to say it. And I'm telling you, if you have a limited way of translating and expressing what's going on in your heart and what's going on in your head, you'll fall way behind. So, you'd have twin problems without a good vocabulary. Number 1, you wouldn't be able to see. Number 2, you wouldn't be able to express, and your world would keep getting smaller and smaller. Not having the vision, not having the tools, finally, you wouldn't need a place much bigger than 10 by 12 to live. Why? That's about as big as some people's world is. That's all they've got. This little narrow world, making mistakes every day. Why? They can't see, getting it wrong every day, they can't comprehend, they can't understand, no tools with which to translate for good communication. Number 1 is having something good to say. Number 2 is saying it well. And number 3 is reading your audience. You've got to read what's going on between you and the people you're talking to. Should you say what you're saying a little softer? Should you say it a little stronger? Should you explain it more? Should you be more clear and concise? Should you quit? A lot of the decision making that's going on during a conversation with someone depends on how well you can read, how well you can tell what's going on in the minds of those you're trying to reach. Doesn't matter if you're looking into the face of a child or the face of a colleague or 1,000 faces in an audience, you've got to read what's going on, you've got to pay attention. So let me give you some ways to read. The first one is you've got to read what you see. You've got to read what you see. Search the face of a child and see if you're coming across. See if they look perplexed. See if they're getting it. See if they can't get it. Body language tells us a lot. Look at how the people you're talking to are sitting. What they are doing with their hands, their eyes. A guy's got his arms crossed, legs crossed, chin tucked down, and frowning. You've got your work cut out for you. This guy's not going to be easy to reach. The lady's standing up from behind her desk. You've got to hurry. She's not going to listen to much more. You've probably got to pick up the pace and get down to it. So the first one is read what you see. Here's the second one. Read what you hear. You've got to be a good listener to be a good communicator. Get some feedback. Listen. To be a good parent, you've got to be a good listener. To talk well, you've got to listen well. That's so valuable. Get the feedback. Now, what you hear may help you change gears, be a little stronger, be a little softer, find a different illustration. This one isn't working. Search for another way to say it. Become sensitive to someone else's words, not just by preparing to talk when the other person's through. Listen. Pick up those signals, the feedback of words gives us. Here's the third way to read your audience, and that is to read how you feel. Emotional signals. You've got to learn to pick those up. Pick up those feelings. Women just seem to have this part built in. Men can learn it, but women have it. A woman says, "It doesn't feel right." Just doesn't feel right. A man says, "What does that mean? It doesn't feel right." She says, "It's something." He says, "Something? What is this something?" She says, "I'm telling you, something doesn't feel right." Now, men can learn it, but women have it. Learn to read your emotions, learn to read what others are feeling so you can adjust your communication, so you can adjust your approach, so you can get your message across, so you can communicate well.